So this could be disaster,
Oh.
right? If this segment never makes it, it'll be my fault.
Yes,
It will.
Christian Hunt, welcome to Grooves Jam.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
It's a pleasure now until we get into this, and then you'll be going, what the hell did I sign up for?
Okay.
But at this point, we'll take that pleasure.
Yes, we will. And, in Grooves Jam, we don't have a speed round, so we're going to get right to the most important thing that we want to talk about, and that is the question. So, yeah, exactly. So, Christian, the question for you is, if you could travel to any time, past or future, and you'd have to stay there and live the rest of your life out there, by the way, what time would you travel to?
So I've been giving this some thought when you posted to me, and I thought I'd have a kind of behavioral sciencey type angle on this one, and a period of time.
No, come on.
And a period of time that really interests me, as you both know, I spend a load of time in Germany, and I spend it in Munich, and Munich's a very Catholic part of Germany. You can really tell that's the prevalent, the public holidays and everything that's driven by that. And so I've kind of just been interested in the influence of the church on the world. And one of the things that's led me is to looking at the whole Reformation and in particular Martin Luther, who, for listeners that aren't familiar with him, he's the guy that basically started to challenge the Catholic Church and asked lots of questions about some of the practices that were there. And he had the audacity to translate the Bible himself again. And so I'm fascinated by that time period, because you've got somebody here who's incredibly courageous and is standing up to orthodoxy, traditional ways of doing things, putting his life on the line. And what's going on at the same time is you've got things like the printing presses has just been invented. So that allows him to communicate. And so travel is starting to pick up at that period of time. So there's all these things going on that I think are super interesting from a behavioral perspective, but also it was a period of huge amounts of kind of people becoming more aware of the world and what was going on, a lot more travel happening, a lot more internet. So I'm just intrigued by this. And so I would love to go back to then to kind of understand some of the things that were going on, because I think it'd be fascinating from a behavioral perspective, but also it would help me understand some of the stuff that's going on in my life now, why the world is the way it is.
But you're stuck there, so you'll never get back to this world.
But that's fine.
And there's no trains back in that time. It's surprising for me that you would pick that time. I love it, but
I think
no
that
trains?
there was so much great thought. There were so many great ideas, basically between, let's say, 1450 to 1550, right? Tremendous heroes in our scientific development, Galileo, and in the arts, I think about Caravaggio, we've got Da Vinci, we've got fantastic thinkers and builders and creators, and the world is changing dramatically. And as you said, Martin Luther was cataclysmic in the influence on our world today, and it would be really interesting to see what it would have been like to actually live through it. But do you feel like you'd have to have sort of access to like the curia, in Rome, like to kind of see, well, what does the Catholic Church have to say about this? Or do you want to would you like to be Martin Luther's servant or his roommate, or, where would you fit in?
No, So I've envisaged this as VIP access, and I'm not sure whether I want to need it for both sides. But yeah, look, anytime I was thinking about this, anytime you go back in the past, clearly we got to start thinking about modern comforts disappear, and we're living in a different time. So I'm going here, I think, more from a curiosity, feeding my brain perspective, right? Interesting stuff happening. So I kind of think I want to be inside, to use the Hamilton quote, I want to be in the room where it happens. I don't think I'm going to allow myself to be in two rooms at once. So then, if I have to pick one of them, I'll hang out with Luther just to see what he's up to. But I also want to do some traveling, because I think it's it's the period of the Enlightenment, right? Loads of things, loads of interesting stuff going on. So I want to kind of you're right, Kurt. There's no trains going there, but I'm sure I can have a horse and carriage to take me on my journey across these fascinating things. So for me, I think it's an intellectual curiosity thing, and I've got to basically recognize I'm not going to be doing lots of the traveling that I'd be able to do now because the means weren't there, but my brain is going to be overloaded, and I think that's quite exciting.
It's really interesting when we think about going back, because to your point, all the creature comforts that we have that we just take for granted, indoor plumbing, running water, heat that isn't, wood derived in the winter months, clothing that isn't, itchy and horrid, right? All of these things that we would just forego. And it'd be even that, I think, from an intellectual perspective, could be interesting. Now, I have to live the rest of my life that way, so that might be very, knowing that, hey, I've come from this world where there's all of these things that you could do, and now I can't do them. It may be like, that's a little bit limiting, but just the curiosity of like seeing how people actually live and seeing both the rich bourgeois as well as going down into, the everyday peasant that is going to be there and just their lives. I think that would be fascinating in and of itself.
Yeah, and I think it's what's really interesting as well is you talk about the kind of physical things, but I think there's also language and people's kind of awareness of the world that's around them. And so I wonder, a little bit of me kind of thinks you take 20th century, we are very aware of lots of things that they wouldn't have been aware of in those days. So a little bit of me thinks kind of, if you go back in that time, maybe we could be really smart, right? I'm often the dumbest person in the room. I love this idea of going back in time, right? And kind of knowing stuff. Right, and being way wiser than the average, because they were, where were they getting their knowledge from? And that's why the printing press thing is interesting for me, because the knowledge that you would have had in those days was from personal experience or stories that you heard from people. Whereas we've got access to all these other things. So I to be clear, right, I would be doing a ton of reading before I went back, right? So before I jump into my Groove Jam time machine, I am reading up all of this stuff, and I'm gonna be amazing at predicting the future for them. So I'm going to be there. So we're getting to all sorts of Back to the Future questions now about, are we allowed to mess with the whatever? But
mess with the timeline.
I'm going to take my knowledge, and I'm going to come across super smart. And actually, this is it. This is how I'm going to get into the room where it happens. Because I've got to be slightly careful here, because I may well be sort of perceived to be some sort of witch, wizard, strange person that knows a bit too much. So I've got to be not too all-seeing. But if I can get myself in a position where I know what is going to happen, I can use that to my advantage, and then I can get myself access to all these interesting people, because they're going to want to talk to me.
So are you keeping in mind that the Spanish Inquisition was roughly the same period, and that because of all this knowledge, you could be quickly deemed a heretic?
Yeah, I think I've got to strategically use my knowledge. I'm probably avoiding Spain for those reasons. That's why Martin keeps me, because I'm not going to be able to travel that far, right? So if I hang around kind of southern Germany, my stamping ground at the moment, if I hang around there, I can pop to Italy, right? That's manageable. Spain is probably a territory I'll steer clear of. I may not want to go too far into Italy because I don't want to get too close to the Vatican. That's potentially risky with my supreme amount of knowledge. So I've got to think about all these things. But I love this idea, right, of kind of recognizing constraints, and you've given me the constraint of I can't come back to the present day. There's travel constraints, which is interesting because nowadays we think if we can go anywhere, right, pretty much anywhere on the planet, we can go there. So in a way, I'm looking at it and going, this sounds awful, not being able to travel, trapped in this world, blah blah blah. But I kind of think that's interesting. And I love this idea of constraints helping to promote creativity. So I think one would have to embrace those constraints and go, that is not a bug, it's a feature of the existence there. So what can we do?
Would you like to hold off? So you mentioned about prepping, this idea of read a ton, get well versed in the era that you're going to. How long would you want to delay? For instance, if you're going to live the rest of your life, would you want to say, I'm going to wait until I'm 75 and then go? So I only have to live a few years,
Yeah, I kind of think. I think it's easier to be a wise old man than some precocious younger person. So let's assume that I can't make myself younger. I'm assuming we're not in Benjamin Button zone here, right? So I've got to live with what I have.
No Benjamin Button zone.
Okay. So I think hanging on a bit when I sort of recognize I'm coming near the end, and then I've got a bit, who knows, right? Who knows how long, all those sorts of things. But I would leave it a little bit because I've got to do my research, right? This is because I tell you, when I travel, one of the things that's interesting is when I travel, and I think technology doesn't help, I'm really lazy at doing my sort of pre-reading. And so I will get to places, right? And then I'll think, what museum should I be visiting in this city? And then suddenly it's like, quick. And so I then cobble together my itinerary. I don't plan I love the serendipitous stuff. So I'd be terrible at all of that stuff. So I would have to beat myself up to be prepared for this, because your one-way ticket to the past, right? It's not clear to me in the construct whether I'm allowed to take guidebooks with me. But for the sake of having some fun, let's say that I can't, right? I can only take what's in my head. I'm going to need to really prepare. This is the biggest examination of my life. I'm going to have to do stuff that is totally alien to me, which is read up in advance. Normally I read up after I've visited places and go, that's what that was about, right? I'd have to do that in advance and stuff my head full of knowledge before going. So I'm going to need some time to do that, Tim.
So actually, Christian, this is really interesting. Would you visit the place, like have an itinerary of where you want to go and then go visit those places today?
Yeah, totally.
And kind of like really explore the area in different pieces, and then like have that like, all right, I'm back 400 years in the past, and 500 years in the past, whatever that would be, right? That's cool.
Yeah, because I'd love to do as well. You know when you go to museums and things, and they tell you that where they reconstruct stuff, and they tell you this is what happened here, right? And they give you this narrative, which is kind of based on the quote unquote research, but sometimes I reckon they make stuff up because they want it. They never. If you go to a museum and they go, we don't know anything. Right, it's not a particularly compelling museum, right? So we go there, and so they make. I swear they fill in the gaps. Let's be charitable, right? Because they have to, because otherwise people wouldn't show up to this thing, right?
Well, so you don't have the hard part that is always amazing to me is that we capture so much today, right? Just between the video, the
podcasts,
written
that kind of thing,
all that kind of stuff. They didn't have that in those days, right? The life of the average person was not recorded. You got maybe some historian or somebody might have found a journal of somebody or somebody referencing it in some larger context, but you, outside of like church records, you didn't really know what they did day in and day out. And that would be even just being able to go back in time and to actually do the journal. Like you would actually be able to help out the future historians by filling in those gaps, because you're the wise old man and you wrote this treatise on the average day of every life of
it's also right, Munich, because if you think about it, right, so the church controls effectively the press, right, because it's the monks that are scribing this stuff, and so you then create the printing presses, and then they're printing versions of the Bible and other things. I'd be like going, the printing press, this is a super powerful tool. You should be using this for other purposes, right? Don't churn. Maybe actually, yes, there's the propaganda element to what you can print, but actually, we should be churning out other things, right? Contemporaneous accounts of what's going on. So I just love this idea of kind of turning up and being at a time when subversion was kind of becoming a thing, because you had people that were willing to challenge, but also the wherewithal to do it with the printing press and so on and so forth. I love this idea of kind of turning up and almost trying to turn the dial up a little bit on the subversion, and just kind of see that going on and be a bit mischievous with that.
I also hear that does not surprise me from you.
Oh yeah,
that does not surprise me from you.
I also hear sort of the sense of you are interested in sort of checking how well the historians have done. Like what did they get right and what did they completely flub? What did they completely make up? What was completely foolish? What was just ridiculous? What, where did they miss it? Maybe, am I catching you right on this?
Yeah, totally. Well, so if you want the parallel, right, this is almost, for me, it's a bit like, when we look at economics and we go, they got all that wrong, right? It's the whole behavioral economics, behavioral science piece where you look at it and go, the model that we created, reckon, history, there must be the same thing, right? Particularly as Kurt says, the evidence isn't there. So there must be a ton of things that are wrong. And there'll be a ton of things that are spot on and accurate. But it is really interesting to say, well, is that actually how it happened? And to your point about there being less evidence, now we have diaries and we have, we're recording everything. And so to go back and it's, it would have been reliant heavily on human memory. And we know how, you've done episodes on this, right? We know how fallible that is. So I think, that's why for me, I'm approaching it. I'm recognizing that I'm going to have to suffer in lots of other ways. So let's get the brain excited and intrigued by some of these questions.
But you could write compliance in 1548 or whatever. The treatise on compliance in the ancient medieval world.
Well, but that's part of the thing, right? So that my work. If you look at what's the compliance regime in force at the time, that's the church. It's the Catholic Church imposing this set of rules on people, and kind of trying to create order by having these sets of rules, and that's what was being challenged. So there is an element of bringing my kind of work thinking of going, well, this was a time when they required a very, very compliant population, which didn't necessarily, and because they weren't that educated, because most of them hadn't learned to read or write.
Yeah,
it's a very different dynamic. So the more I'm talking, the more I'm thinking the return ticket would be quite nice, right? but let's go with the thing and just go. I think it's just super interesting to see how that works. The really sad thing about it is, I think the best bit would be taking this knowledge and doing something useful with it. Of course, you'd be playing within the confines of the playground. But that's the game that we're playing, so we just have to accept that. And I just have to go. And this is why I think, Tim, the more I think about it, it's at the end of my life, right? I'm taking this and I'm kind of getting some insights before, my time is up, because I think there'd be a level of frustration of going, oh, that's really interesting. Because I reckon we'd learn some really interesting things.
Oh,
I think we'd learn some super, because there's this part of me is interesting going back, because we think we're really smart, right? We think relatively speaking, we are more evolved than we were.
Yeah.
But I think there's some things in a way where you would go, actually, some of the ways that they used to do things, we can learn some interesting things from that. And there'll be some, we should, look at the way they've tried to do that. Isn't that really primitive? But there'd also be some, whoa, given where they were and the constraints on them that they had, that was really clever. And talk about, we often talk about sort of constraints being good for creativity, and whether that's time as a constraint. But in those days, they had so many constraints, and so I wonder what I think there would have been some really creative things going on to solve medical problems, to solve other things, to control the population. And so I'm looking at it going, I wonder whether actually they weren't, in many respects, a much more practical people, and a much more, because you had to be practical to solve problems. There weren't experts you could go to, so you had to kind of make do and solve things yourself. So I think creativity must have been quite interesting.
That was sometimes misaligned. My guess is that we have plenty of examples of where, bleeding people was the preferred medical remedy for when you had some kind of trouble. Let's just take some blood out. Science proved us wrong on that. But I get it.
All right. Mr. Houlihan, let's go to you. What would you go? Future, past? Where would you go if you had this opportunity to travel into some different time and location? You can pick a location. Well,
this is like Outlander one way kind of thing, right? This is like the one-way ticket on Outlander. There's no coming back anywhere. And like Christian, I like the idea of being in the world at a transformative time. And because I don't know when that's going to happen in the future, I'm not so much interested in living in the future, because I couldn't pick a time when I know there'd be a lot of transformation. So I'm really curious about what happened towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. It just seems like we've got the development of the light bulb, of First of all, we have electricity coming in a big way. Indoor lighting. We've got transportation that happens in the early part of the 20th century. I mean, it's one thing to have the trains, which was amazing, but then you get to automobiles, and it just feels like that's a magnificent, transformative thing, right up to basically the time the stock market dies in 1929. I think it'd just be really interesting to see that this time of, in some ways, largesse among the wealthy, but the middle class was starting to really show its grit, and I'm fascinated at what it would have been like to be living in a time when these people might have been born in the late 1800s with no indoor plumbing, no electricity, that sort of thing. And now they're living their adult lives with indoor plumbing and lighting and heat and things like that I think would be amazing to see what it's like for them to go through this transformation.
Wow. Yeah. And I love the bit that's interesting for me there is if you take yourself to the end of the 20s, you talked about the Wall Street crash. Of course, you've got a whole load of things that we've lived again. So you've got the Spanish flu, the whole pandemic outbreak. So that's like the COVID replica. You've got the financial crash of 2008 that's replicated there. So I think there's tons of reference
World
points
War I.
that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, very much so. With all the technology that was introduced and brought into play, I mean, tanks, war wagons, airplanes. Yeah.
I mean, you think about air travel and the whole fact that was started in that time frame in various different pieces. And you have the suffrage movement, and at least in the United States, right, where you're giving another whole half of the population the right to vote. I mean, that's a whole nother piece that's going on right at that time. It's an amazing period of history. And you got Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, and I'm not sure where you teed up the additive question of where, and I'm not sure where it would be most interesting, because there was, this was a sort of a Western global thing. I mean, it was United States and virtually all of Europe, to a large degree, was kind of going through it at the same time. The development of airplanes was happening simultaneously at Kitty Hawk in North Carolina and in France, and there was a German that was working on it as well, pretty simultaneously. So I'm not sure exactly where. Probably in the West. I don't think that I would have looked to China or Japan in those years. Although I know in Japan there was quite a bit of development happening at that time. So,
would you? I'm going to ask you the same question that you asked Christian. Would you wait? Would you do this at a later point in your life, and so that hey, I have 5 years left, and that's it? Is that kind of where you are?
Because I had exactly the same inclination that Christian had. This idea that I'd rather, if I'm going to bring all this 21st century knowledge to that time, I'd rather be the sage old man than be some young upstart that has all these strange ideas, or what if we did this? And I'm not interested in being the mogul that capitalizes on, or exploits, some of this knowledge. I'd rather be sage than be a capitalist. Let me put it that way.
I think there's a really important question that we need the answer to, Tim, as well. And I'm going to set a hypothetical here. Just to imagine you can only take one of your hula hats. Which hat are you taking, and why?
See, well, I'm going to take a Hamburg. Because that was such a fantastic hat that was fashionable and kind of common in that period. I wouldn't want to be effete, but certainly I'd like to be a guy who's well about town.
Well, but isn't that like one of the heydays of the hat period? I mean, the 20s, right? So he'd be fitting right in. He doesn't have to take one. He can just go to the haberdasher, and there you go. He's like, customized. He can start the new fashion moving forward because he knows what's going to happen.
I could, but I don't know if I want so much to start. I don't know. So this kind of gets back to Christian. Would you want? I don't have a desire to start something, but I like the idea of having my hand on the dial a little bit.
Interesting. So you don't want to necessarily influence. You're just more of the fly on the wall observing, or
I wouldn't mind having a little bit of
the sage to the people that would listen to you, the crazy lunatic that says he's from the future.
If history is modifiable, and of course, I love that science fiction has been delving into this question for years and years and years. If it's modifiable, then I'd want to try to tip the scale towards let's be better, let's make better decisions, let's do better things. And I would like to have my thumb on the scale, for a little bit of that, but not a lot.
So that's it. Are you around the period of
Yes,
William James then?
exactly.
Would you be in and
Yes.
Freud and all of
precisely.
those, right?
Which might be a good reason to be in Cambridge, or Vienna, I guess, for that matter.
Well, if you're going to Vienna, you've potentially got the old Robert Sapolsky "Would you kill baby Hitler" question to deal with.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, that's
okay,
we can do that on a whole nother groove jam.
Kurt, how about you?
As we go through there, yeah.
Where and when?
This was a tough question for me because, unlike you guys, I kind of like the creature comforts that I have, and yeah, Tim, I know that they're starting to do some of those components, but the vast majority of people still don't have electricity or a car or different pieces. You have to be in the bourgeois, you have to be in the upper echelons in order to have that at the early part of the turn of the century. And Christian, you're way back there where God knows what else you're like. The food you're eating has to be, I don't know. I mean, those are pieces. So I was like, going in the future, I'm going, that could be really cool. You could, the fact of the future is like, I could pick, 300 years from now and we've destroyed ourselves and I end up on a planet where there's no people left and it's ruled by roaches. And I'd be, like, oh crap, I'm stuck here now. And I'm just stuck with the damn roaches. But just know that
it wouldn't last long.
Yeah, but who wants to be, killed by giant roaches? There you go. But I think so what I ended up is I'm like going, all right, if I could go back, to the 60s, right? All right, so we're going back to the 60s at my age. I was born in the 60s, but, I was too young. But it's like going back with the knowledge that I have now, I think would be really interesting. It's like, well, crap, I am going to go and I'm going to see the Beatles concert, when they come over to the U.S., right? Or I'm going to go and be there when they do the upstairs on top of Abbey Road or wherever it was that they did that component. I would be able to be, again, to your point, Christian, I would want to make sure that I do my research enough that I'm like going, all right, I can be at all of these really important things. Martin Luther's speech on
the Mall in 1963
in Washington D.C. on the Mall, right? Yeah. And so you can have that. You can be part of those history components, but then also like thinking about, all right, well, hey, Herbert Simon is alive then, right? And I can be, trying to talk to him. You would have Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky at the end of that time, where in the late 60s, early 70s,
but they're just out of grad school.
Hey, these guys are doing some cool stuff. I could get in with them at that point, and just seeing all of those things and knowing what it is. And then I could invest in some really good stocks and then live a life of luxury because I could be able to capitalize on some of that. So
could you go check out because there's quite a few conspiracy theories from that period. So I wondered if you could just pop over to Roswell and hang out on the grassy knoll, right? All these things.
I feel in Dallas on early, and like, hey, I'm going to go up into the book depository. I'm going to go stand on the fourth floor.
I'm going to deposit some books, right? That's
yeah. So I mean, but again, there's. And again, you're at that moment where we are entering into the space race, right? And so you're seeing, this world. And again, part of this was kind of what hit my head is there is I forget what the story, the television show is that's on, I believe it's Amazon or one of those, but it's this reimagining that, hey, the Russians beat the U.S. to the moon. And then the change in how that encapsulated the entire world because they were seen as first. And, the U.S. then our kind of, emotional psyche went down and Nixon was reelected because the whole thing of Watergate never happened and all of those kind of things and kind of live and going, all right, well, what are some of the facets, as you said, like, the conspiracy theories, but also seeing that time frame would be really.
Would you want to have your hand on the scale? Would you want to be to be having your fingers on the dial that you could say, no, let's have a little bit more of this. And Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, if they were just introduced a year earlier, or if I talked to Herb Simon about what I know about behavioral science in the 2000s, that might influence the way he starts working on it. He's working with his grad students. Would you?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, there's a part of me that is like, of course. Who wouldn't want to be able to like influence history in a positive? And again, the piece that would keep me hesitant is the unintended consequences of all those. It's the killing baby Hitler, right? It's like, yes, definitely do that. But then you go, but there are forces that go on, and we know the history that happened from that. And if we change that, what could that lead to? It could lead to a much worse outcome because we don't understand the chaos, that could potentially occur because of that. So those are those weird things where you kind of sit there and go, yeah, I could, but how much, how much do you change? So, yeah.
And I love that idea of, we would like to think that we would intervene in a good way. Right, every single thing that we did as a result of all the knowledge that we're bringing and the research that we've done and our general brilliance, right, we would come back and everything would be much better as a result of our whatever interventions they were. It's a kind of behavioral scientist's dream, right? This is a perfectly time. My intervention here, to use that term, right, is gonna make things so much better. I was thinking, actually, can you tell him not to call it System 1 and System 2? Just plant some other thing. Right? That would be my wish, right? But you would just kind of go, just come up with something that's a bit snazzier, right? That's a bit more human. Please, just do that. If you just did that, that'd be great. But I love this idea that we kind of go, well, obviously, I'm going to come in, I'm going to be a positive influence. And of course, we know that that's just nonsense. And so I love this. I just love the way you described it, because
there's so much that we don't know that, like, and again, you think about, all right, if you had the chance to take Hitler out at an early age or do something along those lines, most people, I think, would be going, yes, you would save the world from the turmoil that you went on. But if that happened, all right, well, Japan was still an imperialistic component, and they would have done stuff. They might not have bombed Pearl Harbor, but man, they might have taken over most of China and maybe the rest of Southeast Asia and kind of component that. Who knows what would have happened to Germany they might have, gone even further or the other way. But, Russia, what would have happened with Stalinistic Russia? They might have had, different things on this and moved further. And so who knows what all of those factors would have been. And so those are the pieces that you kind of sit there and go, yes, it seems like a logical thing to do. You are ridding the world of this evil, but you don't know what other evil that you're launching that.
Oh, can you stop John Lennon from meeting Yoko Ono? I can't help helping.
Or at least I can, just like kind of maybe introduce some, friction there earlier on. So it's just like, yeah.
That's about the best musical note that I could ever imagine right there, is just stop John from meeting Yoko. That would be, I couldn't agree more, Christian. That would make such a positive effect on history. Yes.
But then you wouldn't have Imagine. You wouldn't have, come on. I mean, some of the
Lennon's
best
a romantic
music ever was a result of some of those interactions. Think about everything that happened, like everything that the rest of the Beatles have done subsequent, and the different ways that they've branched out and different pieces. I mean, I don't know.
Well, you're right. I think that the core of this argument is that chaos is unpredictable. So it's not just that we don't know, but we can't predict all of the ways. I should say we could predict many ways that things might go, but we certainly don't know which route it'll take.
The Beatles might have become the 70s Elvis. Who knows? I mean, they could have all gotten fat and lazy and just gone to Vegas. Come on.
Well, we have Sir Paul McCartney as evidence that has just didn't happen. Thank God.
Well, it didn't happen for him, but if the Beatles would have stayed together, who knows? So.
Okay, so with that, I think we should wrap up. I do love that we ended up sort of sequentially moving from the 15th century, maybe 16th century, into the early part of the 20th century, into the middle of the 20th century, and I think that was pretty great.
But nobody picked the future. I thought that was fascinating. Nobody would decided, hey, I want to go to the flying cars, living on the moon,
anticipated regret,
having all of those kind of pieces.
Why would I go to a future that is completely unknowable? Too risky. Right, Christian?
Yeah.
You're kind of.
So, yeah. Well, I think what I think's interesting here is that you're sort of going. For me, it was about understanding more about something I know about, rather than being willing to take the risk of the completely unknown. And we have a frame of reference,
right?
And I think that's the interesting thing. And I think what this has really highlighted is that level of. I mean, this is only a thought exercise, right? So we could have just taken it well, but I love the fact that we've shied away from that. And I think this is what you've revealed there is some of the limitations of our thinking. Probably, if we're honest, we all lack the imagination. That's quite hard. I'd have to write a whole. Kurt started with his Roach narrative, and we'd have to write a narrative to to explain. I can go back and I can tell you a few things, and you've got context. If I talk about the future, I have to write the entire script, because I have to say, well, this is what's going to happen, and we're all a bit lazy, right? So it's a little bit easier to go. It's an easier story for me to tell you if I'm picking something that we all know about.
I think there's another piece of this is. It kind of goes to how hopeful we are about the future. If I was really hopeful that we are going to be just an egalitarian, society that thrives in the future, then yes, I want to go to that future to see all the wonderful things that we've done. But and if you would have asked me probably in my 20s or 30s, I might have gone there. But I think the past 15, 20 years, I have become much more of a skeptic of human nature and our societal impulses, and saying, man, we know all of these things, and yet we still, have these competing elements where we just don't talk to each other, and we hold on to our strong beliefs. And so do I hold out as much hope for the future as I did when I was younger? I don't know if I do. And that's a scary thing when you start to think
I'm plenty
about
optimistic about the future. I think it's going to be better. I think it's going to be better in a lot of ways. But I go back to Christian's argument in that if I transport myself 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, 500 years into the future, I'm going to be a dumbass. I won't know anything about what has happened. And it's not going to be fun.
So it's no different than today. So
there's no point. There's no point in doing the trip. Then
no different than today.
There is no point in going on that journey. Right? You can experience that now.
Exactly. I'm living the dream. So why subject myself to round two? Yes, that's the idea. Yes.
I think with that, I think we have to end it there, because I don't know if we can do any more. But it is interesting, the concepts and the things that we talked about here. So, Christian, thank you for joining us, for having this as you said, thought experiment of us going through. But we appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure as ever.